Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session of our ISO Online Metadata Training Series, hosted by National Coastal Data Development Center, a division of the NODC. Today's session is going to be on creation methods and writing metadata. Again, if you have a group of participants in a single location, please email the list of participants to ncddcmetadata@noaa.gov. Also, if you have any questions, please email those to ncddcmetadata@noaa.gov or use the question window in the webinar. Again, all of the materials are found on our FTP site. This includes the recorded sessions and the presentations and the workbooks. Anywhere that you see this green information button at the corner of the slides, that is where you can click on that slide and go to more information in the wiki, and that wiki includes examples and further discussion on that topic of that slide. And the workbooks are also found not only in the FTP, but on the ncddc.noaa.gov page as well. So we're going to get started with today's session with writing metadata. And we're going to go over some tips on how to write quality metadata. We're going to go over, there's 6 basic steps for writing quality metadata, and once we get through with this, you will be able to apply those 6 steps. All right, first off, writing metadata is not so bad. Your first records are always the hardest and most difficult, but after you get doing it a couple of times, it becomes easier and easier and second nature. So your first one's going to take a lot longer, but once you get used to the standard and the tools and the information and what they're kind of asking for, you'll start being able to do it much more quickly. So again, the first records are your hardest. Don't gauge how much effort is going to be put into creating metadata off your first record. Not all fields have to be filled in. Make templates. Trim off a lot of fields that you know are not going to be applicable to your data. There are tools that are available. We went over that whole session on the tools for the ISO metadata. There's a lot of tools out there. There's some that have nice graphic user interfaces and some that are XML based. So it really depends on your personal style and what your preferences are. You can choose a tool that will play to your strengths. So tools will make it a lot easier. Also, training classes can be taken. There's this training class. There's also some other training classes available, and there's also tool-specific classes that are available as well. A lot of records and a lot of metadata can be produced automatically. If not all of the metadata, at least a large portion of that metadata record can be produced automatically or use templates again. And again, also, when you write metadata, you should always review the metadata to see if it has the data updated, then your metadata needs to update as well. So here are the 6 steps for writing quality metadata. This has several pointers on writing metadata and thinking about the content of records. You really need to review before you start writing records. Okay, the steps in writing quality metadata: first, organize your information. Make sure you have everything set up in front of you. Go through and identify what is static information and what will be dynamic. The static information you can use to build templates for other data types of this that need metadata. Write your metadata file carefully and follow the standard. Next, review that file for accuracy and completeness. A lot of times you need to set it down and then come back to it. It's always nice to have someone else review, because you get too in the weeds and you're still looking at things. You may miss something as simple as a typo or misspelling, or also if you have somebody else review it, they're not as familiar with the data as you are, so they may have questions that, oh yes, I need to document this information so that other people can find this metadata more useful and use my data more easily. Revise it based on the comments from your reviewer, and then once you go through all of this, publish that metadata somewhere. Review it once, and then before you publish it, please, again, that's for your own, that'll help with your own headaches of having to go back and revise things later. But publish it, make it accessible. You do all this work of documenting your data, make sure it goes along and gets published with it somewhere. To optimize your efforts, consider metadata from the very beginning of your project. If you make considerations for metadata in the initial planning stages, you'll save yourself time, effort, and money in the long run. Okay, so before you begin writing, get organized. Establish a format or protocol for data documentation and stick to it. Document your efforts at all stages of your data development. It's much easier to do this as you go rather than to come back months later and recreate this information. Write simply for an uninformed audience. Since you can't predict who will use or who will need to use your data in the future, you need to remember to write for a novice audience. You cannot assume that your readers will understand your subject the way that you do. Someone completely unfamiliar with your data should be able to understand your subject and quickly surmise why you created the data set. And always review your document. You can either have someone else look over it, or if you are the only one available, put it aside and revisit it a week or so later. Now, there are some basic items required for successful metadata creation. You need an ISO standard workbook or any other standard workbook of the standard that you're using. Since we're doing an ISO specific class, you need your ISO standard or your ISO workbook. You need a metadata entry tool, whether you use a GUI or if you're using an XML editor. You also need a sense of humor, coffee, and chocolate. These I have found to be some of the most useful tools for metadata creation. All right, you need to keep your readers in mind. Write to meet the needs of your audience. Write simply for an uninformed audience. Since you can't predict who will need to use your data in the future, you need to remember to write for a novice audience. You can't assume that your readers will understand your subject the way that you do. Okay? So think about that. So write simply but completely. Keep your writing simple. Use clear, familiar words. Although clear communication is simple, it is not simple-minded. It's effective, normal language that we use every day. Okay? Establish a style and use it consistently in your records. Carefully consider the conventions that you will use and use them consistently throughout your document. In fact, consider creating a style sheet so that from file to file you cite similar items in the same way. Especially in ISO, again, we can use those components, so we can reuse those pieces so that we have a familiar way and a consistent way of documenting things. Always place similar references in the same spot in your metadata files. Okay? Make a habit to give credit to anyone who worked on your project. Establish a style for presenting titles and use this style for all titles in your agency. Set rules for capitalization and hyphenation and stick to them. And be consistent with your terminology throughout your documentation. Use the same word to mean the same thing throughout your entire document. And try to avoid using one word to mean two different things. When writing your metadata document, always define any acronyms you use. They may be things that are familiar to you, but someone else who is reading your document may not know what the acronyms mean. An example, CD. Is that compact disc, certificate of deposit, change detection, certified dealer? At all times, okay, you really, different acronyms could mean different things in different communities and environments. So please define them at least the first time that it's referenced to. Define it and spell it out. At all times, avoid using jargon. It causes unnecessary confusion. Use the example of, there's different adult literacy programs, okay? If you have different instructors from different areas, they may use different jargon in different ways. That's utilized a lot in adult literacy programs out there in training for that, if any of you have taken them. And also, since this class is really, we have a lot of people from different backgrounds internationally, jargon doesn't translate very well. So that's something to be really mindful of. Try to maintain consistency in your style and in your terminology, okay? And always state the limitations of your data or data set. A metadata record is used by others to determine the compatibility of use when looking for data to supplement or to complement their own data. I call these lawyer blurbs, and this is something that can be a template to be added to all of your data sets or to all of your metadata. A lot of times your agencies and your organizations or institutions already have these kind of paragraphs set in stone that you can take and apply to these certain limitation fields. All right, one of the most important things is writing a good metadata title. A title is the first item of a record that will be seen a lot of times with different style sheets. It's also used for searching. A lot of our search tools use titles, keywords, and abstracts, but really they search on the title is a lot of times the first thing somebody's going to see or read about your record. A well-written title can answer many questions that a potential user may have. For example, if you're involved in research that focused on erosional effects of major storms, you would not want to title your metadata such as storms or erosion. Instead, include information on what, where, when, the scale, and who in your title. Now your metadata might be titled something like Analysis of Erosional Effects of Major Storms Along the South Carolina Coastline Using 1 to 20,000 Aerial Photography, 1990 through 1998, Federal Emergency Management Agency Disaster Preparedness Division. Okay, remember that you know, that's a lot more information than storms or erosion. And when you come up with a search tool and you're typing in certain search terms, you know, if somebody's looking for erosional effects and they pull up that record, but they're not looking for the South Carolina coastline, they know to bypass that record immediately. But if they are looking for South Carolina coastline, they'll know, oh, that's what I want. Is this time frame what I want? All without having to open up the record and delve into all the specifics of it. They can tell immediately from the title. Take a look at these two titles. Okay, you have Greater Yellowstone Rivers and Forest Visitor Maps and the time frame and the scale here, and then you have rivers. Which one's better? Can the better title be improved anymore? Think about how much more information is being conveyed in the first title. Now imagine searching for this information. Can you see how difficult it would be if all metadata records were simply titled rivers? Well, you might have several records just named rivers because you'd have different time frames or different scales or different areas. And how would you know which is which? Be specific, quantify when you can. Remember, data quality is a big issue these days. Think of data usability, accountability, and liability. Okay? Be specific in sections of the documentation where you must evaluate how good or complete your data are. Estimate using specific measures when possible. All right? Example for a vague one is we checked our work and it looks complete. Or specific, we checked our work using 3 different sets of check plots reviewed by 2 different people. We determined our work to be 95% complete based on these visual inspections. The second example provides more information and addresses the issue of accuracy much better than this first example. Select your keywords wisely. Since other people will use keywords to find your file through a search engine, your keywords play an important role in helping users find what they need. Use control list or thesauri, code lists. There's a lot of different thesauri out there. There's the Global Change Master Directory, which is GCMD. There's the Integrated Taxonomic Information System, ITIS. There's a lot of them out there. Make sure that your keywords are clear and unambiguous. Okay? Use a variety of descriptive words. Fully qualified geographic locations. Use standard references to determine proper usage. Think broadly, then think narrowly. For example, have like a broad stroke keywords such as hydrology, stream networks, rivers, environmental quality. Then narrow, it's specific compounds measured, such as monitoring water intakes. Double check your work. Your metadata records will live for a long time. Okay, ideally, you should give your metadata to someone else to review, preferably someone who has neither worked on your project nor is very familiar with the subject matter. This type of peer review can be effective in helping you make sure that your documentation is clear, easy to understand, and meaningful to all types of users. If you use this system, however, be prepared to receive criticism that is sometimes pointed and direct. Check for state or regional or national compliance before you finalize your records. For instance, North Carolina State Public Record Law requires certain elements be included in an abstract. If you're publishing to some places, such as data.gov or geodata.gov or oceans.data.gov, there are certain keywords that trigger where those records are going to end up going to. So make sure that they are compliant to wherever your end result is you're wishing it to be. Have a manager review your record to ensure that your organization authorship is properly recognized, perhaps for political reasons maybe. Also have your managers review your work. They'll help them recognize the value of creating metadata and help them more fully value what you do. It's critical that you review your final documentation to check for clarity and omissions. But if you're the only reviewer that's available, it's best to let time lapse sometimes before completing your final project. Often we find mistakes and omissions on the second reading when we come back to it. Ask yourself these questions as you write your record. Can anyone understand what I wrote? And is my data are my data properly documented for posterity? It's important to remember that someone may be looking at your data and they may not have had the same level of knowledge about that data that you do. Try to write in generalized terms whenever possible. All right, does the documentation adequately present all of the information needed to use or reuse the data represented? Are any pieces missing, such as projection information, source citations, and processing steps? Remember, one of the main reasons for documenting your data is so that someone else can use it or continue where you left off. Whether it is someone outside of your organization or a new staff member just getting started, a properly documented data set can save time, money, and frustration. The main thing in all of this is to write so that others will understand. So who is your audience? The bottom line, remember who your audience will be. You might not know who ends up getting your data or who will be using it. And again, the 6 steps for writing quality metadata. Organize your information, write your metadata file carefully following the standard, review your file for accuracy and completeness, have someone else read your file, revise it based on the comments from your reviewer, and then review it once more before you publish it. All right, so now we're going to go into different creation methods. We talked about tips for writing quality metadata, so now let's go into actually writing it. You can create ISO metadata either from a template or from scratch or from a transform. Again, multiple ways. You can transform from existing FGDC metadata or some other existing metadata. If you already have metadata in some other standard format, such as FGDC or Dublin Core, Darwin Core, or some other standard that's out there, you may be able to automate it over from one standard to ISO or between standards. You could also use templates and just fill out the dynamic information from a template, or you can start from scratch. I do not advise starting from scratch since there are so many good templates out there, and especially if you're new to writing ISO metadata, starting from a fresh record may be a little overwhelming at first. So I would start slowly and then get into it. And there's actually guidance for transitioning between standards if you already have existing metadata in one standard, particularly the FGDC CSDGM. The FGDC has metadata guidance at this website. website here. All right, we're going to talk about creating ISO metadata via transforms. All right, transforms, extensible style sheet language transformations, XSLT, is an XML-based language used for the transformation of XML documents into other XML or human-readable documents via style sheets, also XSL. So XSLT does the transformation from one standard to another, and XSL are what gives it human readability. The original document is not changed. Rather, a new document is created based on the content of an existing one. This does not guarantee a valid XML record against a particular schema. Simply displays the content in a new way. This is a small part of the mapping, a crosswalk from the FGDC CSDGM to the ISO 19115. Crosswalks identify how elements map to each other. The transforms, XSLTs, actually do that mapping. And this just shows, this is the FGDC CSDGM name, its XML tag, and here's where this element belongs in the ISO field, how it corresponds, how it maps over. So transforming metadata, here's how it works. You have your input XML version of, in this case, we have a CSDGM standard record. You apply your transform, your XSLT. Here we chose the XSLT to take the CSDGM to the ISO 19115. So you apply your appropriate transform, and then you get another XML record. Your result is an XML instance of an ISO 19115 record using this content. This process also works for XML to HTML views. If you have an ISO or some other XML instance and you apply an XSL, the style sheet on top of it, it will produce an HTML or a different view of that document. All right, these are the steps if you happen to be using an XML editor such as XML Spy, using some of the files that are on the FTP. What you can do is you open up XML Spy XML editor, open up the FGDC remote sensing XML file named metadata to transform.xml. Okay, so this is an FGDC XML document, and then you can, in XML Spy, you select F10, or you can go to XSL, XQuery, XSL transformation dropdown, and then you're going to select your appropriate transform. Since we have a FGDC remote sensing record, we want to use the appropriate transform, and our end goal is to get it to 19115-2. So we're going to select the FGDC RSE to ISO 19115-2 XSL. Okay, you're going to run that transformation, and the end result will be this record, but now it's in the ISO format. All right, so here we're going to walk through this. Here, this is an XML Spy. And you see, because it has the data set ID, that's a key that shows you that this is a FGDC remote sensing record, so you must use the correct transform. You can select F10 or hit this XSL XQuery. This pops up. You're going to choose the correct XML file, transform. Again, these are all on your FTP. And we're selecting the FGDC RSE to ISO 19115-2. And once you select OK, and if you notice over here, this is the XML FGDC. Well, it'll pop open in the browser view like this, and once you hit the text, it brings you now this record, this information is in an ISO XML format. Same information, it's now just brought over into ISO. All right, now we're going to walk through the same thing using Oxygen. If Oxygen is your preferred XML editor, you're going to open Oxygen. You're going to open up this same record, metadata to transform, but you have to set up a transformation scenario the first time you use Oxygen. After you set it up, you won't have to set it up anymore. You can just simply go and select that one. Name the scenario something that you know that when you can reuse, such as RSE to ISO 19115-2. Then select that appropriate transform and transformation engine. For Oxygen, select either the Saxon PE or EE transformers, because that basically what this means is that they're XSLT 2.0 compliant transform engines, and that's what the transforms are written in. So when you set up an oxygen transformation scenario, select one of these two engines that will be able to run that transform. Altova XML SPY automatically selects that and does that for you. Oxygen gives you the flexibility to choose which transformation engine that you want to run. And then you'll run the transformation. All right. Here's the same record opened up in Oxygen. Again, this is a FGDC remote sensing extension record. You can either select that or use these drop downs. The little monkey wrench is easy to pick. Name your transformation scenario something so that you know to reuse it, such as RSE to ISO 1915-2. I want the current file, okay, so whatever's current in this background right here, and I want it to go use this transform. I'm also going to select which transform engine I want to use. So now I have a list of transformation scenarios already set up, okay? So once you have these already set up, I have this record and I want it to transform it. Since it's an RSE and I want to take it to ISO-2, I can just select this. So now on any time I have this record or these types of records I want to transform, I can just come from this list and pick that one that I've already set up. And you hit OK or Transform Now. And here's that record now in the ISO 19115-2 format. You can also transform FGDC metadata using NCDDC's MERMAid tool. From the record level, select the Export tab, and then select which transform, the ISO 19115-2, and select Produce View button. A new window will pop up, and you will have to use the Save As to save the file. Here, from the record level, this is the record, hit the Export tab, select your transform that you want to run, and then Produce View, and it will pop open a new tab that you'll have to actually have to hit File, Save As. But here's this record in the ISO format. There are other transformations available, such as ISO back to FGDC. There's diff to ISO. There's an FGDC threads, netcdf to ISO. There's lots of different various ISO and FGDC views, different HTML views of those records. And then there's a lot of custom transformations, such as you can actually create transforms to take information from databases to populate your metadata record to meet the metadata standards. The records that many of you are used to seeing is the HTML view or the text view. Again, this is achieved by a style sheet applied over the base XML to display however you want it. XML, Extensible Markup Language, is a set of rules for encoding documents in machine-readable form. XML's use emphasizes simplicity, interoperability, and usability over the Internet. So again, you may be used to seeing this, but this is what's running behind the scenes in the background. This is the computer-to-computer side of it. And this is the nice human-readable side with style sheets. Here's an ISO view of the same thing. You run this using style sheets the same way that you do the transformation, but instead of selecting the transform, you'll select the style sheets to apply. So again, if you want this XML, this ISO XML record to look like this, you would just go select the transform ISO XML to ISO HTML, and it will produce this view. And again, this is much easier for people to look at and read and search on and pull up rather than seeing the XML behind the scenes. But for use over time and for archiving, you want to keep this XML intact. There's a lot more information available on the Transforming Metadata XML transformation page from ncddc.noaa.gov. This is the link here, www.ncddc.noaa.gov/metadata-standard/metadata-XML. There's a lot of different templates that you can use to get started on the FTP. There's some basic templates there to get you started in the templates folder. There's the MD_metadata template, which is the 19115. There's the MI metadata template, which is the 19115-2, which is basically just adding acquisition information. There's the feature catalog, the SC template, and then there's also the bio metadata template. That adds in taxonomic information as well. And these templates are all available on the FTP. You can try some of the tools that we looked at in the Tools for ISO Metadata session to create metadata from scratch. Remember, though, it may be most helpful to find a record that is similar to yours and start from there. Sometimes working from scratch is the best way if you don't want to have to delete a lot of information and want to begin with a basic discovery level record or to get used to it. But your first time delving in, you might want to baby step and work your way up to this. Again, use your metadata tools such as GUI interfaces or XML editors, whatever you're comfortable with. Again, please email questions for the Q&A session to ncddcmetadata@noaa.gov or use your questions window. Thank you.